Hey, full house. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. So just a little bit of housekeeping. First, you've got a mobile phone. You've forgotten to turn it off, like I forgot to turn mine off. Now's the time to do it. Not that I think we actually have any signal here. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end, and after that, Terry will also be doing a book signing, and that will be, there are books for sale on the other side of this partition behind us, and the book signing is in Harry's Bar, which is down at the end of the hotel. So if you want a book signed, please buy one there and take it to Terry, and he'll do that. So, I'm Richard Walker, I'm just the compere, and I have been given the sort of least necessary job in the world, which is to introduce Terry Waite, a man who is recognised not only in every single high street in the country, but actually all over the world. He's here thanks to the support of two very important people. King Street Wealth has supported this particular session, and Seaport Freight Services support the entire festival, and so we're very grateful to them. They are paying for our pleasure. Terry, I'm going to give you a brief, potted biography of Terry, so we know what we're dealing with. And then I'm going to ask him to talk, and I'll ask him a few questions before you ask him a few questions. Terry started life in the Grenadier Guards. Grenadier Guards didn't suit, so he immediately found himself in a different army, the Church Army, where I read that he pioneered psychological training to engage the laity. It sounds a little bit terrifying, really. Maybe we'll hear about that. His next job was as an advisor to the Archbishop of Uganda. His timing was immaculate because he hadn't been there very long when the country was taken over by Idi Amin. And he had some experiences as a result of that. He worked in Rome. 1972, I believe you went to Rome and you worked for the Medical Mission Sisters in the Roman Catholic Church. So we never say that Terry casts his net narrowly. He became diplomatic advisor to Robert Runcie, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And in that role, he travelled just about everywhere in the world. And his specialism was in negotiating the release of hostages. And he did it very successfully in Iran, in Lebanon. And in January 1987, the people he was negotiating with took him hostage. He spent nearly 5 years in captivity, more than 4 of them in solitary confinement. I read that much of that time he spent chained to a radiator. Since his release, he's become a fellow of Trinity Hall, Cambridge. He's chaired charities, he's written 2 books on his hostage years. He wrote a book on his time with Archbishop Robert Runcie, and he also recently returned to Lebanon to meet with his former captors. And he has just published a comic novel. We'll talk about the novel, but before we do that, there's terrible news in the newspapers today about the horrible attacks in Tunisia. And I think it's particularly terrible because, of course, Tunisia was the cradle of the Arab Spring. Tunisia is where a sort of huge new wave of hope for a better life in the Middle East started. Terry's been involved with the Middle East, as we all know, for years and years and years. And I think you have some thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. Can you hear me without the microphone? Yes. Can you hear me at the back?
No.
No? Then move to the front. There's a seat here. There is a seat, actually, if you want it. Just one spare one. Yeah. If anyone would like this seat, is it free? Just free, okay. Well, let me begin by I'm going to speak about serious subjects, but let me begin by just telling you a story that's not totally true. It's the only one, I think, that's not totally true. When I came out of captivity, the Archbishop of Canterbury said, "Good to see you," he said. "I've been praying for you for 5 years." I said, "That's very nice of you." He said, "Yes, but you came back." Well, I'm back in this part of the world, in Felixstowe, and it's good to be here. It is, as Richard said, distressing news this morning. And I just want to spend just a few minutes looking at this event. An event, of course, that is impossible to laugh at. It's not funny in any way. It's very, very serious. But what lies behind all this? Let me tell you, again, this is a true story. In captivity, when I was there, John McCarthy and Brian Keenan were kept together. And during their time, the food became very bad. They complained, and nothing happened. And then after 6 months or so, the head man came to see them, and he said, "Well, what is it you're getting?" And they told him. And he said, "Oh, that's wrong." He wasn't without honour, totally. He looked into the matter, and of course the boy, the guard, who'd been given money to buy food, had practiced the old trick. He'd pocketed half and spent the other half on food. So they took that guard outside and they shot him. Because they said, if you will cheat us on small matters like that, someone only has to come along with a large bribe and you give the whole organisation away. Well, now, there's a lot in that story. A young man, a young Muslim man, who is frustrated perhaps by what he reads about the difficult situation Muslims are facing in many parts of the world, not least in the Middle East. Someone was telling me this morning at breakfast of a visit they made to Bethlehem, to the occupied territories, where they're not exclusively Islamic, but there's a Christian community rapidly diminishing, and a large Islamic community that are suffering terribly. And there's no doubt about that. They are, in fact, in a very difficult situation. That doesn't mean to say there are not good people on the Israeli side. There are. But there is a system there in operation which is grossly unfair and grossly wrong. So they see that, and they see other situations around the world. Then comes along a charismatic leader, and he persuades them that the way to achieve greater justice, and bring the West to its senses, is to engage in terrorist activity. And so what we have now around the world, not necessarily a highly organized organization, ISIS is organized back in its own territory, but we have little franchise groups occurring here, there and everywhere. So as someone said on the radio this morning, you know, no one can be sanguine. It can happen anywhere. It can happen in this country, it can happen in New Zealand, it can happen as it's happened in Tunisia. Because it's a tactic. And you have to look behind these things and say, these events, as well as hostage taking, they are symptomatic of deeper disorders. And again, just let me go back a little bit in history. I am not saying for one moment that our invasion of Iraq was the sole cause of these problems. But I will say it was a contributory factor. And I say that for the following reason. Bush and Blair together led the invasion of Iraq to overthrow someone who was, frankly, a brutal dictator. There's no doubt about it. He held people down by force, and he was overthrown. Now, at the time, many diplomats who'd got experience in the Middle East, the 18 of them, retired now, so they were free to speak, wrote a letter to the Times saying extreme caution required here. And I remember saying myself on more than one occasion, remove a dictator by force who's held the people down by force, and you release forces you are not able to control. That happened in Iraq. Look at Syria again now. Attempts to remove him and forces are revealed. Look at Libya. Gaddafi, I met Gaddafi, and we maybe talk about that later, it can come up in your questions. I spoke with him. People said it's impossible to talk to Gaddafi. It wasn't impossible. He was a difficult man. He was eccentric, perhaps bordering on various forms of mental trouble that I don't know, I'm not qualified to talk about. He was an unusual man, but it was possible to talk with him. Yes, he exercised strong, brutal methods, but the number of people now who've died, civilians who've died in Iraq, is incomparable to the number who died under Saddam. And the number of people who, the distressing state that now we see Libya is in, when you've got now ISIS virtually on the banks of the Mediterranean, it's a very, very distressing situation. Now, you could argue that what has happened as a result of that invasion, forces were released, hundreds, thousands of innocent civilians have been killed in the process, have died in the process, and it set off a whole chain reaction around the Middle East. Mark my words, I am not saying it is the only factor. I'm saying it is a factor in a complex mix. And how do we get out of that? How do we deal with that? Eventually, I mean, I have been working, Richard, I founded an organisation called Hostage UK. Hostage UK, we give support to hostage families. And we've been working very closely with the families of those Americans and the British who've been beheaded. Horrible, absolutely horrible. And we've been working with them. We know that situation intimately. These young men who come forward and commit these terrible acts, only a couple of days ago, 5 men were put in a cage and drowned, and they were filmed as they were drowning. I mean, that sort of behaviour, I mean, goes against anything that is truly Islamic, goes against any decent principle at all. It's done by young men who are clearly psychopathic, and every organisation, every terrorist organisation has within it a proportion of people who have psychopathic disorder. And they're put forward, or push themselves forward, in order to present a brave front, a ruthless front, to say we will stop at nothing, and if you oppose us, your end will be disastrous. That happens, we see it. And somehow, though, behind the scenes, the problem will be resolved not through warfare. It may be now that the situation has got so serious that some form of armed conflict is going to be required, even just to restrain people. But having said that, it will be resolved in the long run by talking. And you say, can you talk to ISIS? Well, it's clear from what I understand and what I know, that behind the scenes, there are people in ISIS who are not totally in support of some of these brutal acts that I've just been mentioning. We know that. And there will be talking already taking place. And if you look back in history, you look back to Mau Mau days, you look back to the troubles in Ireland, eventually they were resolved through talking, through building a relationship of trust, and through talking. That's what will have to happen in this case. But before we get to that point, there's going to be a lot more bloodshed and a lot more disturbance around the world, because you can't suddenly stop this forward movement, this aggressive movement. You can't suddenly stop it. And as I say, I think you know, for my sympathy certainly goes out to the people who suffered so terribly in Tunisia, dreadfully. And, you know, my sympathy goes out to, I had to watch the video for professional reasons, because I'm working with this situation, the video of the man being burned alive in a cage, burned alive by ISIS, just dreadful. But then, of course, that immediately impinges on us, and we say, that is terrible, it truly is terrible, dreadful to watch. What we do not see, of course, are the innocent civilians, women, children, men, who are burned alive as a result of a bombing attack. We don't see that. And yet there have been hundreds of them, hundreds of them. The whole situation is dreadful. And somehow we have to get to the root. I've always said about hostage taking, Richard, that it's symptomatic of deeper disorders. And in foreign policy, what we have to do in our foreign policy is get to those deeper disorders and somehow tackle them. Sorry, that's a long speed, but it's an introduction.
Well, it does often seem, doesn't it, that the situation we're in is that there is no point of contact. It seems, how do you move forward? How do you make contact with people where there is no point of contact? But you've done this yourself. You've been in the business of negotiating the release of hostages. And again, in captivity, you must have learned some lessons about how to break through that barrier. Because at the moment, we're talking about what is happening in ISIS territory, there does seem to be a barrier. It seems almost inexplicable. How do you break through? How do you break through with people where there seems to be no common ground?
Well, if I can go back to, first of all, I mean, my main negotiating experience at that level began with General Amin in Uganda, a brutal dictator, when many of my colleagues were taken, thrown into prison, and a number murdered. I mean, I had to negotiate with him. And I was able to get contact with him. And there are basically, you can't give a precise formula for this, but you can say there are roughly the following steps. First of all, in all my hostage negotiations, the first step was to make personal contact with the person who is organising the whole event. And actually face-to-face contact with them. Now that is dangerous, because you're dealing with people who are highly volatile. People said it will not be possible. Well, just I'll give you one very quick snapshot of how that was done, as you asked the question. In Beirut, where eventually I was captured, I can explain that in a minute, in Beirut, when John McCarthy, Brian Keenan, Terry Anderson, all the others were taken hostage, nobody knew who had taken them precisely. If John was taken, somebody would say, Islamic Jihad for the liberation of Palestine. If another hostage was taken, another name was given. So you say, who is it doing this? Is it one group using different names to confuse? Or are there several groups taking hostages and doing what often takes place, selling them on to somebody else? Nobody knew. The Foreign Office didn't know, the State Department didn't know. I went to the State Department in America, I met with the Vice President of America, with our Foreign Office. They didn't know. They knew it was generally the group in Lebanon, but generally Hezbollah, but no specific identity. And so what did I do? I made a lot of public statements through television, World Service, local agencies, saying I was willing to go out and meet face-to-face with the captors of the hostages to discuss the situation and to talk about it and see if we could find a resolution. Well now, I made so many of those appearances that eventually I was accused of grandstanding. But in fact, it was a definite strategy. Now, in all these situations, you depend also a little bit on luck. Luck does enter into these situations. One day, Myron Belkind, who was the AP Associated Press bureau chief in London, came to see me. And he handed me, in Lambeth Palace, he handed me a bit of paper. And on this paper was a message. And the message said, "We're the people you want to see, come and see us." Words to that effect. It was signed by 4 men, Americans in this case, whom we believed to be in captivity. So the first thing you do is check for authenticity. Those signatures were correct. And so therefore, okay, I took up that offer and got out there, that's another story. But years later, I discovered what had happened. The captors had heard my messages through the media, through the BBC, through other agencies. They decided to talk with me, which was an indication that they were willing to talk because they had another agenda. They went into the cell where these men were kept. With this pre-written message, they got them to sign it. They took the message, wrapped it round a stone, got into a car, drove across Beirut, threw the stone into the doorway of AP. AP picked it up, relayed it to London, and it came to me. And that was my first contact. That's how. So all I'm saying is every situation is different. With Gaddafi, I got to Gaddafi through Julius Nyerere. Julius Nyerere was at the time president of the old African, what do you call it? The Union of African States. OAU, Organization of African Unity, OAU. He was president of that. And I went to see, I phoned him up one day and said, "Can I come and see you?" I saw him in Tanzania. I asked him to get to see Gaddafi, if he would open the way for me. He said, "Gaddafi's a strange man, I can't promise." But within 2 weeks, he'd done it, and I was meeting with Gaddafi and talking with him. And it's all about building trust, getting to the root of the issue, trying to listen, rather than going in with the aggressive, "I'm here to defeat you." I'm here to listen to you and listen to what you're saying. These are in political cases. There are two types of hostage taking, of course. There is the criminal type, which is for ransom. There's the political type, which is for the achievement of a certain political goal. And I'm speaking about political taking now. So if you can listen, and then if you can find a way of unraveling, which is very often the case, at least you can begin to make progress. The thing is, we are so quick to deploy arms in so many situations. I'm not a pacifist, I wish I could be, and I lean that way. I do believe in certain situations the use of armed force is required, but I don't think until it should be applied until every other situation has been fully exploited. And I think sometimes our politicians, working as they do to a 5-year term for re-election, are so anxious to quick and say, right, we'll show them, you know, that diplomacy isn't given a chance. And consequently it goes from worse to worse until eventually, as was the case with the IRA, as was the case with the Mau Mau, as will be the case now, eventually talks have to take place and the situation has to be resolved that way.
But the whole time you're doing this, of course, you're giving yourself a higher and higher profile. You're making yourself a valuable counter in the game, and you're making yourself more and more vulnerable to being put into captivity yourself. Now, I'm sure you were saying to yourself, no, that's not going to happen, but that turned out to be wrong.
Well, it did happen. I was captured, and someone asked me this question, and I promised to answer it. I said, hold it on, and I'll answer it in the general session. You know, about your capture, he said, actually, were you naive in going back? Well, the answer is I don't believe I was naive. I believe I was trusting, yes. But I went back on the following ground. If ever you think that I am full of altruistic motive, then, you know, I'm not. I'm like any other human being, a mixture. And I don't believe that most people are, well, there are not many people, let me put it that way, who are full of altruism. I went back to Beirut at a time of great political trouble. One of the difficulties facing a humanitarian negotiator such as myself is this, that if you are able, as I was, to establish contact with hostage takers under highly secret and difficult circumstances, you can guarantee that every intelligence agency in the world will want to know you who've got an interest in that matter. And your problem is this: how much do you share, how much do you keep to yourself? Because on the one hand, you want to support people who are seeking the release of innocent people who are captured. On the other hand, if you've any political savvy, you'll know governments play games and sometimes dirty tricks that you don't wish to be associated with. So you tread a very delicate line. Everybody wanted to know with me. I tried to follow that procedure with Oliver North. I certainly didn't tell him everything, but I made a fundamental mistake in accepting an American helicopter to take me into Beirut at one time when I couldn't get in any other way, and was associated with him in other ways also. And so, really, what happened in that situation was a time when there was a big political collapse known as Iran-Contra. I can explain it, but it's going to take too long. But just to say, there was a political collapse, and I was advised not to go back by my Archbishop. However, I also had information that the hostages were ill, and I was told by the hostage takers that one was about to die. And they said I could go and visit him. And I debated with myself, and I said to them, directly to their face, because I was in Lebanon, I said, look, if I come with you, you will keep me. And he said no. And I went away, thought about it for 24 hours, and decided this. I said, and this is where personal motive comes in, personal consideration. I said to myself, if they are telling me the truth, and if that man dies, and I haven't had the courage of my conviction to go back, I'm going to have to live with my conscience. And so I trusted him to that point. I went back and was captured. That was it. Okay, I can live with my conscience because I believe, as far as I'm concerned, I did the right thing. And I'm not being smug about that, I just believe for myself. But, you know, it was interpreted in all sorts of ways. Like the gentleman said, were you naive? Did you go get... The Archbishop didn't want me to go back. And if it had been a member of my staff, I would have said, for goodness sake, don't go back. But sometimes, in life, there comes a point where you know you must do what you really believe, otherwise you're just a total fake. You know, you're just a showman. And I don't want to be that.
Before we wrap up this part of the conversation, Terry, let me ask you this. I think in the last 4 years or so, we've kind of seen two completely contrasting sides of change in the Middle East, the place that you've been so bound up in. We saw the Arab Spring, and it spread from country to country to country, and we saw this huge sort of upwelling of hope for change, which was positive change, desire for some form of modernity. It seemed hugely positive, and we've also seen the complete, total opposite of that. The Arab Spring has to some extent collapsed, and this sort of malignant force has come to the fore instead. So we had Al-Qaeda, now we've got ISIS, we have the disaster of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, everything that looked so promising for such a brief moment seems to have turned very dark. Are you hopeful?
In the immediate future, no. I think it's going to be difficult in the immediate future. In the long term, yes. But what has happened, of course, is that it set off the Arab Spring, it set off a number of hairs running. For instance, if we go and look at the Arab Spring in relationship to Syria, I do not believe that we were right in our foreign policy to take sides in that. I think we should have taken a negotiating role. And I think we were wrong because anybody with any sense would have known that the Arab Spring was going to be infiltrated quickly by Al-Qaeda, they were going to exploit that situation, and we were going to have an even greater mess. So therefore, a mediator, no matter how bad, you know, sometimes better the devil you know than the devil you don't know in these situations. And that sounds a difficult thing to say, but it's true. It's a fact. Better, you know, Saddam than the carnage that has resulted. But Saddam won't last forever. When you think about it also, it's taken us, in this country, How many years to get a reasonable, not a perfect by any means, but a reasonable form of democracy? It's only a few hundred years since, in the name of religion, we were disemboweling people and we were cutting the heads off people. And we just got to think about that we were doing that in this country. And Islam has never had a reformation. It's not been reformed. And what has happened now, one of the hairs that has been set running in Islam is this long-standing conflict between Shia and Sunni, which is a big, big issue. Sunni being the strict orthodox, Shia being, as some would consider, a deviation from the orthodox and different. But what has happened as a result of our invasion, it has opened the gates for Iran, which is in fact a big power and a big Shia stronghold, to spread the Shia influence now across the Middle East and to actually gain a foothold. So we've got the conflict there, religious conflict, as well as all the economic difficulties, leadership difficulties and so on. The problem eventually will have to be resolved by the Islamic world and by Islamic leaders coming forward and being brave enough to actually state the truth about the situation and not just fall into the pattern of violence which we've got into, we are in. And I heard the other morning, I was greatly encouraged, I can't remember his name, but I heard on the Today programme an Islamic leader from this country speaking the most clear common sense about the situation and saying how we have to do a lot of work with young people so that the next generation will not in fact fall into this way. But there's not going to be an easy answer to it, and I'm sure we all know that. And there's going to be a lot more suffering yet, which is regrettable.
So, we've done a lot of comedy up to now, haven't we? Terry, you've written a comic novel. I'm not going to reveal too much about it. I'll let you say anything you like about it. But what I will say is, so I think we would call it a picaresque.
Oh, that's what you could, yeah.
And whatever we call it, we begin with a sort of retired supermarket dog's body in Grimsby and his wife, who's not always in a good mood, and a failed senior Navy officer who is actually just in shouting distance down the coast in Frinton. Essex, of course, we won't hold that against them. And a lottery win of several £1 million, which kicks things off, and it just sort of rattles on from there. And oh yes, and there's a great character. He's a former hostage turned lecturer, very comical.
Toby Troy, yeah. Well, let me give you the background to the book. When I was in captivity, I was no books or papers or anything for years. And, you know, I used to chained to the wall for 5 years. It wasn't actually to a radiator, I mean, that's the story, but it was actually to staples in the wall. And, you know, you see your skin go white because there's no natural light. You lose muscle tone because you've no exercise. And I began to think I was getting old before my time. And I saw my beard go long and white, you know, it really looked pretty grim. Although I had no mirror, I could see the beard as it was growing. And one of the ways in which you deal with that is you realize that somehow you have to keep a lively inner life, inner imagination. Now, I've been doing recently a number of conferences on the brain, believe it or not, in universities, with people like Colin Blakemore, who is a brain specialist. He specializes in that area of study, neuroscientist. And one of these conferences, we were talking about this experience, and I said, yes, I used to, because I had no one to speak with, no one to talk to for years, I used to create pictures in my mind. I used to create imaginary characters and speak with them. And Colin turned to me and he said, you know, if a patient came to me and said that, I would say they were crazy. I said, yes, that's right. But you see, people with mental illness often have difficulty in communicating with other individuals. And I had no one to talk to, so I create my pictures. So I developed, in captivity, creative imagination. And this is a product of that. And it is creative imagination, really. And it's based on the fact that for over 30 years, I have lectured once or twice a year on cruise ships. And you meet all sorts of cruise ships, all sorts of types. And I was once on a cruise ship with a cruise director who ran the ship like his domain. And he had language classes. And no one wanted to go to these language classes, but he always put them on at the prime time, 11 in the morning. And I was with Michael Burke, the newsreader, he and I were doing. And he put Michael and I on at 3 in the afternoon, you know, when everybody was asleep. And it really, really irritated me. So I thought, well, yeah, why not write about these characters you come across on the ship? Can I read you a bit? Read you a bit, yeah, I'll read it quickly. Often on ships they have themed dinners. Themed dinners. And this is the golden handshake. So Mr. Tucker, who is the chef, you'd be surprised to hear, Mr. Tucker organises a themed dinner called the Golden Dinner. And a great character, one of my favourite characters in the book, the Doctor, is hosting a table for Albert and Alice, who are the people taking the cruise, and Mr. and Mrs. Potts, who are their next door neighbours, and they have balcony suites, because they have a balcony suite, they show a little bit of the rest. Hello, 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 shipmates, he cried. This is the Doctor. Alice is wearing a large flowered dress. Just back from the Chelsea Flower Show, are we? He laughed heartily at his own joke and sat down. All hail and hearty, I take it, he continued, as he gazed at the dour features of Thomas Potts. Cheer up, old chap. Death can't be far away. Mrs. Potts gazed at him in horror, but quickly regained her composure and managed a sickly smile. Now, he said, as he picked up the menu, especially embossed in gold, what harm is old Tucker going to do to us tonight? He perused the menu. I say, it's a good night for those who like pig food. I see we're starting with sweet corn. He paused. Porker again, he continued as he noticed golden glazed ham. Yum yum, pig's bum, as we used to say at school. I guess the security officer is taking no chances, making doubly sure no Islamic Johnish slip in for a quick kebab, eh? Alice thought it prudent to try and change the subject, but for the life of her couldn't think what to say. She was rescued by Mrs. Potts, who attempted to make polite conversation. Doctor, she began, have you been at sea long? Dr. Hackett took a gulp of champagne that he had arrived with and held up the flute for a refill. I've been at sea most of my life, Mrs. Potts, totally at sea. He returned his attention to the menu. I say, golden syrup, he exclaimed. Out of the strong came forth sweetness and all that. And golden shred marmalade pudding. You can tell old Mike Tucker never went to boarding school. If he had, he would never serve this stuff. Come on, drink up. It'll soon be time for the corn. He placed his glass on the table and began to sing. Fair wave the golden corn in Canaan's pleasant land. Lovely hymn, that. Brings tears to the eyes. Both Albert Hardcastle and Thomas Potts remained silent. The speed at which the Doctor conducted the conversation was too much for them. Fortunately, there was no need for further exchange. For that moment, a side door opened, revealing Mike Tucker and his team, all wearing tall golden chef's headgear and bearing golden salvers. They marched into the room as Giovanni struck up the theme from Goldfinger on his accordion. The team member made his way to the table and planted a salve on it. When Mike shouted across the room, "Open sesame!" the cover was smartly removed, revealing a stack of corn on the cob. Come on, said the Doctor, tuck in. No FHB, family hold back at this table. The two flowered ladies politely declined the first course, both saying that they were saving themselves for later. Quite right, said the Doctor as he jabbed the corn with a plateless skewer. I bet your husbands can't wait. The ladies ignored the saucy remark, and Albert made a face. He'd never eaten sweet corn before and wasn't quite sure how to tackle it. He tried cutting it with his knife and fork, but the corn kept slithering around his plate and was too tough to cut through. Thomas, on the other hand, picked it up with his fingers, but as it was so hot he promptly dropped it and he went sliding under the table. Thomas thought this was how the Doctor was eating his, but he failed to notice that the two skewers inserted into each end of the other man's portion. He decided enough was enough, and it was left to the Doctor to take what he wished. Pretty good considering, he said, as he wiped butter from around his mouth with his napkin. I can now understand why porkers look so contented. Stay around long enough, old boy, he turned and addressed Thomas, and the secrets of the universe will be revealed, mark my words. I knew a fellow once who ate nothing but carrots, day in, day out, carrots. He turned bright orange. He didn't feel too good, but at least he looked bright. As I said, it's important, you know, not to allow the events of what we're facing, some of the terrible things I would say, to allow us to rob us of our humour. We should still be able to laugh. And as I said to you earlier, Richard, much of what goes under the heading of modern humour doesn't make me laugh, so I thought, have a go yourself, see what you can do.
Let's take some questions.
Yeah, good idea.
We've got just over 15 minutes, time for some questions, but they will have to be almost at the top of your voice because we've got no mic to go around the room. So, who would like to ask? Right at the front.
Very quick one. Had you read Papillon, the book, before you went into captivity, and drawn anything else of that in terms of ways to survive?
Just tell us what's in Papillon.
Papillon was locked up in solitary confinement in a French penal colony
Devil's Island,
the south coast of America. Yeah. Or South America, yeah.
Did you hear at the back? Yeah. Papillon, had I read Papillon before I went into captivity, and did it help? Worse than effect, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been to Devil's Island, I've been to the place. In actual fact, Papillon was a bit of a romancer. He wasn't actually kept on the main. It's very questionable whether he actually escaped from that island. He was probably moved to the mainland and escaped from the mainland. However, it's a good story. And the answer is I read it, and the answer is it was totally useless. I'll tell you the story about it very quickly. You know, they came into my cell, and I asked for books, and they wouldn't bring me books. But one day, a guard came in with a book. He didn't know what he'd bought me because he couldn't read English. And when he put the book down by my side, and I picked it up and looked at it, he brought me Great Escapes. And in that book, it's got about the wooden horse. You know, and when the guard come into the cell and say, well, now, is there anything in a perfunctory way? You know, is there anything you want? I'd say, yeah, a wooden horse would be very nice. I never understood.
Gentleman in the second list.
Terry, I was very interested to know what impact World Service had from a point of view of helping you survive during that period, because I understood you didn't get a radio until much later in your career.
No, I got a radio. What help did World Service have to help me survive? I didn't have a radio for about 4.5 years. But then I did get a radio. Well, first of all, I used to tap every night. I used to tap on the wall my name. You couldn't tap it out in Morse code because you can't distinguish Morse code anymore, but you could do it this way. You know, 1 for A, 2 for B, 3 for C. It's then you regret your name's Terry Waite. Anyway, after about 3.5 years, I heard the tapping come back. Terry Anderson, Brian Keenan, John McCarthy, they were next door. And they'd been chained to the wall, so now they could tap back. And they had a radio, and they brought me news of the outside world. For the first time in years, they brought me news that my family were fine, because my cousin John is a broadcaster, John Waite, and he was able to make occasional forays into the World Service to broadcast snippets of news. I learned of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Totally surprised to me, I learned of the end of apartheid, which I never expected to see in my lifetime, having worked many times with Desmond Tutu. So I learned all these things through the war. Then eventually, I did get a small radio, a $10 radio as I called it, you know, little battery. And I was terrified in case the batteries ran out and they wouldn't replace it. But they always did, because it was coming right to the end of captivity. And it was an absolute godsend. I've been a great believer, supporter of the World Service, and subsequently, and prior to that, made many broadcasts on the World Service. And Alan Johnson, who was captured, remember Alan, journalist? Yeah. Alan when he came out, said, "I'm so grateful to you because I got your messages that you were sending out on the World Service." He actually got them, and they gave him a bit of a moral boost, as I received a moral boost also. So I think there's a lot of other things I could say about the World Service. I just think it's been excellent as far as I'm concerned.
A question almost at the back.
I'm just wondering, the value, how do you see the value of writings today, books, newspaper reports, etc., actual writing, how can that help solve the situation, explain to people what is actually happening between religion and politics, etc., etc., if someone's actually sit down and write, the writings can help, books, etc.
Well, I think explanations will help. I mean, I don't know if you know or not, but the number of journalists who have been killed in the line of duty over the last years has been absolutely dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And I do give them support, because if they were not there on the ground actually accurately reporting, we'd be much the worse off. There's no doubt about that. Having said that, when it comes not to news reporting, when it comes to comment, I think we need comment that is reasonable, that is balanced, and that will get behind the scenes so that you can begin to see, as I was trying to discuss at the beginning, some of the roots of this issue. That's what we need. And some people have been very good at that. I mean, one writer whom I read, who's died now, sadly, who had motor neurone disease, wrote, he was Jewish, and he wrote very penetratingly about the situation in the Middle East. Tony Judd is his name, and if you ever come across Tony Judd's writing, they're brilliant, because he was able to, from a Jewish perspective, but nevertheless paint an extremely reasonable picture of the problems facing that particular region, which are problems for Israelis as well as problems for the Palestinians. And where you get that sort of informed comment, it's good. The trouble is, I think we're getting a lot of, also, when it comes to comment, getting some sensational rubbish, which is not worth bothering with. But how do you know? I mean, if you're an ordinary member of the public and you're not au fait with these situations, how do you make your discernment? It's pretty difficult.
I recently read in the paper that David Cameron had said that there was austerity preceded the 2 world wars, and that it was very worrying times. Do you think there's anything that can happen for a 3rd world war? The fact that we are in this period of austerity?
David Cameron said, apparently, and this is the question, that before the first 2 world wars there was trouble, you know, building up to world war, austerity and what have you. Do you think we're in for a 3rd world war? I think we're already in it. I think we're in a 3rd world war, which is a very different type of world war. Rather than the old conflict of armies facing up against each other, we've got guerrilla terrorist tactics popping up here, there, all around the world. So it is a world conflict. No nation can consider themselves apart from the troubles now. As I said at the beginning, it could blow up in New Zealand just as it can blow up in Tunisia or in London. And you know, I think everybody has to be especially vigilant about it, because there will be more attacks in this country. I think you could say that with reasonable confidence. It's a very difficult situation. We are already in it, a 3rd world war, in my view.
Another question?
Terry, it's great to have you here, by the way, in Felixstowe. I don't know if you'd said that yet, but thank you for coming.
Yes.
Can I ask, as a Christian, your faith, how has that helped you over the years, and perhaps how has it perhaps got in the way in certain circumstances?
Well, an interesting question. Thanks for asking that. I'm not a sort of person to wear my faith on my sleeve. I have my belief. When you're in captivity, you are stripped from all external supports. You know, there's no church, there's nothing. So therefore, you really depend upon what you have from within. I could say, in captivity, something very simple in the face of my captors. I could say, You have the power to break my body, because I was tortured, I was beaten. You have the power to bend my mind, because I was interrogated. But my soul is not yours to possess. Now by soul, I don't think anybody can make an accurate definition of soul. But by it, for my definition, for my purpose, I said that's a total person of who I am. And even if you kill me, you will not possess me completely. Now that very simple belief, admittedly a simple belief, was enough to enable me to maintain hope. And if in situations of extremity you can maintain hope, you're halfway home. Just 2 days ago, I've been a patron of the hospice movement for years, and I was speaking at St Christopher's Hospice in London for the original hospice in the world, founded by an old friend of mine, Cicely Saunders, who's now dead. And I said there, you know, to people, we're all terminal cases, you know, all of us, everybody in this room is a terminal case. None of us know how long we're going to live. The great secret, live now. Live for today. Doesn't mean to say you don't plan for tomorrow. Live for now. And remember, just if there's one simple thing from the Bible that I would hold on to, it's this, that we are co-creators with God. We have within us the capacity to create, the capacity to destroy. And we see both in operation in the world. Let's try and turn our attention to working creatively now. Because this very meeting, this time as we're meeting now, this is our life. You know, not tomorrow, this is now. And so part of the secret in captivity of living reasonably successfully with all sorts of handicaps, live in the moment, develop what abilities you've got there, and try and make that creative. And I never got into the position of pleading with God to get me out of that. I wouldn't use my own words. I was always glad I relied on the old language of the Book of Common Prayer. You know, lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord, and by thy great mercy defend us from all the perils and dangers of this night. A prayer that has meaning when you're in the darkness. It has harmony and rhythm and poetry. And one of the things you're trying to do in captivity is maintain inner harmony. And in my view, good language, like good music, has the capacity to breathe harmony into the soul. And so religion at its best can enable that inner harmony to take place. And hopefully, if it takes place, you know, if you're going to be a peacemaker, make peace with yourself. And then you're probably in a position to be able to affect it elsewhere.
You know, Terry, it's something that I've often wondered about. You speak of the ways in which you deal with the pressures of captivity. Is it actually, in your experience, was it harder to deal with captivity or harder to deal with being released?
It was harder, it was differently hard coming out. In those years of captivity, one of the reasons I was interrogated, and actually went through a mock execution, so in talking with the families of those people who've been executed recently, I can understand something of what it is. Having been through that, and having convinced my captors that I was, in fact, a humanitarian and not an agent of government, they let me live. I'd have died otherwise. Everybody who was captured along with me, who was associated with government or military, died. So I got out of that, and I was able to convince them, because they did accept the truth. But when I came out, I had to face all those accusations again. You know, there was a Panorama program made with accusing me of arms dealing. Well, for goodness sake, you know. And I thought, oh dear. It really upset me, because I thought, you've spent 5 years convincing these extremists, and now you come back and you've got to start all over again. So the advice was, forget it. Don't even look at it. It'll go away, because the truth will out. And it's gone away, it went away. But that was, in actual fact, it was harder in some ways to face that, because it was a double attack on one's integrity. Now I don't say, let me be clear, I'm not saying I'm goody-goody, I'm not saying I'm completely full of integrity in every situation, but in that one I can be absolutely clear. There is absolutely no equivocation on that one.
We're trying to take just one more question. It's right at the back.
Have you ever been encouraged to stand for Parliament, or do you feel you're better off actually making your comments in the House?
Yeah, have I ever been? Yes, I was. Before Martin Bell took up the seat in Tapton, the Tapton constituency, which is my home area, Cheshire, they asked me to stand, and I said no, so it went to Martin. And then when Martin retired, because he said no, I won't go for a second term. Remember, he made a promise. He asked me again, would I go? And I said no. And the reason is, to be quite honest, I don't fit easily into any one political party. That's one thing. And secondly, I mean, since I came out, I decided that I would spend I'd give up a salaried occupation. I haven't had a salary for over 20 years. That I would give my time to working with hostages, prisoners, the homeless, and overseas development with young people, starting some of the projects to give next generation a chance. I wouldn't take any money from that, and I'd subsidise myself by writing and lecturing. And I've done that. I wouldn't have had the courage to do that had I not been through captivity. And I thought, probably, and this is, who knows, but probably I'm better deployed doing that than arguing the toss about which political party is right and which is wrong. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to waste my time doing that. So, so that's a straightforward answer.
Terry, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you here with us in Felixstowe. Thank you very much.
One word about the book. It has been proposed, and we're still in the process of looking at it, that this book be made into a sitcom. So if you want to get the chance of having first edition, signed copy, with the typos, it will be unique. I just say that, and I'm going to sign them now. Okay, thank you very much.
So as I said, those books, including all of the typos, Thank You Authentic World, are on the other side of this partition. Terry and I are going to race around to Harry's bar, where you're...
Is that where we are? Yes. Am I in Harry's bar?
You are Harry's bar.
Right.
Does that suit you?
Yep, let's go.
Good. Where signing will take place.
Thank you very much. Sir. It's quickly, doesn't it? Right, okay. Right. Okay.
I'll take another just in case he often closes his eyes. Thank you, Terry. There we are.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
I think it was this afternoon.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, oh, you better get moving, yeah. So do I used to live there.
Yes.
What are you doing on holiday? I